No, don't do it. My mother Patricia screamed across our dining room, her voice filled with terror that made my blood run cold. I was sitting at our beautifully set Christmas table in Phoenix, Arizona, my fork halfway to my mouth with a bite of honey-glazed ham, when she suddenly bolted upright from her chair like she had seen a ghost. Before I could even ask what was wrong, my mother collapsed to the floor with a sickening thud. The fork clattered from my hand as I rushed to her side, my heart pounding against my ribs. Her face was pale as winter snow, and her breathing came in short, desperate gasps. "Mom! Mom, what's happening?" I cried, dropping to my knees beside her trembling form. Vincent, my stepfather of 3 years, appeared beside me with surprising speed. "Call 911, Mary. Something's terribly wrong." As we waited for the ambulance, my mother's eyes fluttered open for just a moment. Her hand gripped mine with surprising strength, and she whispered words that would haunt me for weeks to come. "Do not trust anyone." Those 4 words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the December evening. Why would she say something so ominous? What had she seen or discovered that made her collapse in terror at the sight of me eating dinner? My name is Mary Thompson, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a marketing coordinator for Sundale Financial here in Phoenix, and until that Christmas evening, I thought my biggest worry was whether my latest advertising campaign would meet its quarterly targets. I live alone in a cozy apartment downtown, but I always spent holidays with my mother and Vincent at their sprawling house in the suburbs. Vincent had been a welcome addition to our family after my father passed away 4 years earlier. He was attentive, charming, and seemed genuinely devoted to making my mother happy during her golden years. They met at a grief support group, and their relationship blossomed quickly into what appeared to be a loving second chance at happiness. But as the paramedics loaded my unconscious mother into the ambulance, Vincent's concerned expression seemed different somehow. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place, something that made my mother's final warning echo even louder in my mind. The Christmas dinner sat abandoned on the table, the festive mood completely shattered. As I grabbed my purse to follow the ambulance to the hospital, I caught Vincent glancing back at the dining room with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't grief or worry. It was something much more calculating, and it made my stomach twist with unease. At Phoenix General Hospital, the doctors worked frantically to stabilize my mother, while Vincent and I paced the sterile waiting room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in an unforgiving glow that made Vincent's face look almost skeletal. "She just collapsed out of nowhere," I told Dr. Williams when he finally emerged from the emergency room. "She screamed at me not to eat, and then she was on the floor." Dr. Williams frowned, consulting his clipboard. "We're running extensive tests, but her symptoms suggest some kind of toxin exposure. Her blood work shows elevated levels that indicate poisoning." "Poisoning?" Vincent's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine shock. "How is that possible?" The doctor shook his head grimly. "We're not sure yet. Has she been feeling ill lately? Any unusual symptoms or behaviors?" I thought back over the past few weeks. My mother had seemed quieter than usual, more withdrawn. There were several occasions when I caught her staring at Vincent with a strange expression, almost like she was studying him. When I asked about it, she simply said she was tired and had been having trouble sleeping. "She's been a bit distant," I admitted, but nothing that seemed serious. "We'll know more once all the test results come back," Dr. Williams said. "For now, she's stable but unconscious. We're doing everything we can." As the hours dragged by, I found myself replaying every detail of the evening. Vincent had prepared most of the Christmas dinner himself, insisting it would be his gift to us. He spent all day in the kitchen, shooing us away whenever we offered to help. At the time, I thought it was sweet that he wanted to take care of everything. Now, sitting in that hospital waiting room, my mother's warning kept echoing in my head. Don't trust anyone. But surely she couldn't have meant Vincent. He had been nothing but loving and supportive since joining our family. He helped with my mother's finances, took care of household repairs, and always seemed genuinely concerned about her well-being. Yet something nagged at me. Vincent had been particularly insistent that I sit in a specific chair at dinner, claiming it had the best view of their new Christmas tree. He had also personally served my plate, making sure I got the best pieces of everything. I watched him now as he sat across from me, his head in his hands. He looked like a man devastated by his wife's sudden illness, but there was something about his posture that seemed almost too perfect, too theatrical. "I can't believe this is happening," he said, looking up at me with eyes that seemed to be searching my face for something. "Your mother means everything to me." "I know," I replied automatically, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. As we settled in for what would clearly be a long night, I couldn't shake the feeling that my mother's collapse wasn't the random medical emergency it appeared to be. Something had terrified her enough to risk her own safety to stop me from eating that dinner, and I was determined to find out what it was. 3 days passed with my mother remaining in a medically induced coma while the doctors worked to flush the toxins from her system. Vincent and I took turns sitting by her bedside, but I found myself watching him more carefully than I ever had before. On the 4th day, while Vincent was at home showering and changing clothes, I decided to return to my mother's house to collect some of her personal items for the hospital. What I found there would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The Christmas dinner still sat on the table, untouched since that terrible evening. The food had spoiled, filling the house with a sickly sweet smell that made my stomach churn. As I approached my place setting, my mother's terrified scream echoed in my memory. Something compelled me to examine my plate more closely. Unlike the other servings, mine seemed to have a faint, chalky residue that didn't match the natural appearance of the food. Acting on pure instinct, I carefully scraped some of the residue into a small container I found in the kitchen. That afternoon, I drove to a private laboratory across town, claiming I needed to test some questionable food for my elderly mother's safety. The technician was sympathetic and agreed to rush the analysis. The results came back 2 hours later, and they confirmed my worst fears: rat poison. A lethal dose had been mixed specifically into my portion of the Christmas dinner. My hands shook as I stared at the lab report. Someone had deliberately tried to murder me, and my mother had somehow discovered the plot, just in time to save my life. But who would want me dead? And why? I sat in my car outside the laboratory, my mind racing through possibilities. I was a single woman with no enemies, no significant debts, and no dramatic relationships that might inspire such hatred. The only thing of value I possessed was a modest inheritance from my grandmother that I had received 2 years earlier. Money that would revert to my mother if something happened to me. But if someone wanted to harm my family's finances, killing me wouldn't accomplish much. My mother was the real holder of the family wealth, having inherited the bulk of my grandmother's estate, along with my father's life insurance and retirement savings. Unless someone was planning to eliminate both of us. The thought hit me like a physical blow. If both my mother and I died, who would inherit everything? As my mother's husband, Vincent would be the natural beneficiary of her estate. And if I died first, my portion would simply make his eventual inheritance even larger. I thought about Vincent's insistence on preparing dinner himself, his careful arrangement of seating, his theatrical concern at the hospital. Had my mother discovered his plan? Was that why she looked so frightened when she saw me about to eat the poisoned food? With trembling fingers, I started my car and drove toward the hospital. I needed to search through my mother's personal effects and see if she had left any clues about what she had discovered. If Vincent was behind this, I was going to find the evidence to prove it. At the hospital, I waited until Vincent left for his evening coffee run before searching through my mother's purse and the bag of clothes I had brought from home. Hidden in the inside pocket of her favorite cardigan, I found something that made my blood run cold. A folded piece of paper with Vincent's handwriting. The note was a crude calculation of asset values, listing my mother's bank accounts, property value, life insurance policies, and investment portfolios. At the bottom, he had written M's portion with a question mark, followed by calculations showing various scenarios if I were to die before my mother. My hands trembled as I photographed the note with my phone. This was evidence of premeditation, but I needed more than just his financial calculations. I needed proof of his actual plan. Over the next 2 days, I played the role of the grieving stepdaughter while secretly investigating Vincent's background. I hired a private investigator named Janet Rodriguez, explaining that I had concerns about my stepfather's past. What she discovered was even more disturbing than I had imagined. Vincent had been married twice before my mother. His first wife died in what was ruled an accidental drug overdose, and his second wife died from food poisoning during a romantic dinner he had prepared. Both deaths occurred within 3 years of marriage, and in both cases, Vincent inherited significant assets. The police investigated both deaths, Janet explained during our meeting at a coffee shop downtown. But there wasn't enough evidence to pursue charges. However, the pattern is concerning. Your stepfather seems to have a talent for becoming widowed under financially beneficial circumstances. I felt sick to my stomach. My mother, in her grief over my father's death, had unknowingly invited a predator into our family. Vincent had spent 3 years gaining her trust, learning about our family's finances, and positioning himself to inherit everything. There's more, Janet continued. I found records showing that Vincent recently increased your mother's life insurance policy and changed the beneficiary details. He's also been making inquiries about the probate process and estate transfer procedures. The evidence was damning, but I still needed proof of the actual poisoning attempt. That evening, I returned to my mother's house while Vincent was at the hospital. I needed to search his personal space for evidence of the rat poison or any other clues about his murderous plan. In Vincent's home office, tucked behind a row of books on the shelf, I found a small metal container that made my heart race. It was rat poison, with only about half the contents remaining. The container was partially hidden, but not well enough to escape a thorough search. I photographed everything, careful not to disturb the positioning. Then I noticed something else. A manila folder labeled Insurance and Estate Documents sitting on his desk. Inside were copies of life insurance policies, will documents, and what appeared to be forged signatures on several beneficiary change forms. Among the papers was a handwritten timeline in Vincent's writing, detailing his plan. It was methodical and chilling. Phase 1. Eliminate M during Christmas dinner. Stages accident what food poisoning. Phase 2. Console P through grief. Assume caretaker role. Phase 3. P's natural health decline within 2 to 3 years. Phase 4. Full estate transfer. Relocate to new state. The clinical nature of his planning made me nauseous. He had mapped out the murder of his wife and stepdaughter like a business strategy, complete with timelines and contingency plans. But the most damning evidence was what I found in his computer's search history. Over the past 2 months, Vincent had researched untraceable poisons, inheritance laws, and even how to comfort a grieving spouse. He had also looked up real estate listings in Florida and information about changing one's identity. I copied everything onto a flash drive and carefully returned the room to its original state. As I prepared to leave, I heard Vincent's car pulling into the driveway. My heart pounded as I slipped out the back door and around to where I had parked my car down the street. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to be strategic about how to use it. If I went to the police immediately, Vincent might destroy evidence or flee. Instead, I decided to set a trap that would expose him completely and ensure he faced justice for his crimes. The next morning, I called Vincent with carefully planned news. "The doctors say Mom might be waking up soon," I told him, watching his reaction closely through the hospital room window. "They want to reduce her sedation gradually and see if she responds." Vincent's face went through a series of expressions that confirmed my worst suspicions. First came what looked like genuine relief, quickly followed by something much darker: worry, calculation, and what I could only describe as fear. "That's wonderful news," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'll be right there." Over the next several hours, I observed Vincent's behavior around my mother's bedside. When he thought I wasn't watching, his expressions were cold and calculating. He seemed to be studying the medical equipment, the nurses' schedules, and the security cameras in the room. That afternoon, I implemented the first part of my plan. I arranged to meet with Detective Sarah Martinez from the Phoenix Police Department, explaining that I had discovered evidence of attempted murder. I presented her with copies of all the documentation I had gathered, along with the lab results showing rat poison in my Christmas dinner. "This is serious evidence," Detective Martinez said, reviewing the photographs and documents. "But we need to be careful about how we proceed. If Vincent's suspects were onto him, he might try to flee or destroy evidence." "I have an idea," I said. "What if we set up a controlled situation where he reveals his plans himself? We work together to design a plan that would give Vincent an opportunity to incriminate himself while ensuring my mother's safety." Detective Martinez arranged for undercover officers to monitor the hospital, and we set up recording equipment that would capture any conversations in my mother's room. The next day, I told Vincent that the doctors wanted to try waking my mother up, and that she might be able to communicate within a few hours. I also mentioned, seemingly casually, that the police had asked me some questions about the Christmas dinner incident. "What kind of questions?" Vincent asked, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. "Oh, just routine stuff about whether Mom had any enemies or if anyone might want to hurt her. They're treating it as a potential poisoning case now." Vincent's face went pale. "Poisoning? But the doctors said it could have been food contamination or a reaction to something." "Apparently the blood test showed something more specific," I lied smoothly. "They think someone might have deliberately tried to harm her." That evening, Vincent requested some private time with my mother. Through the surveillance equipment Detective Martinez had installed, we recorded him as he sat beside her unconscious form and began to speak in a low, urgent voice. "Patricia, I need you to understand something," he whispered, apparently believing she couldn't hear him. "If you wake up and start talking about Christmas dinner, it's going to cause problems for both of us. The police are already sniffing around, and if they start investigating too closely, they might discover things that would be better left buried." He paused, looking around the room nervously before continuing. "I know you found my research notes. I know that's why you stopped Mary from eating. But you have to understand, this was the only way. Your family has more money than you'll ever need, and I've worked so hard to take care of you. I deserve to be taken care of too." The recording captured everything: his admission that my mother had discovered his plan, his confirmation that he had poisoned my food, and his complete lack of remorse for nearly murdering 2 people for financial gain. Detective Martinez and I listened to the recording from the hospital security office, and I felt a mixture of vindication and disgust. Vincent had sealed his own fate with his arrogant confession to what he believed was an unconscious victim. The next morning, we prepared for the final confrontation. Detective Martinez had obtained a warrant for Vincent's arrest based on the evidence I had gathered and his recorded confession. Several officers were positioned throughout the hospital, ready to move in when we gave the signal. I arrived at the hospital early and told Vincent that the doctors were planning to wake my mother up within the hour. His nervous energy was palpable as he paced around the room, clearly agitated by the prospect of my mother regaining consciousness. "Maybe we should wait," he suggested. "Let her rest a bit longer. There's no rush, right?" "The doctors think it's time," I said firmly. "She's been unconscious for almost a week. We need to know if there's been any permanent damage." At exactly 10 a.m., Detective Martinez entered the room with 2 uniformed officers. Vincent's face went white as he recognized the authority in their bearing. "Vincent Morrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder and insurance fraud," Detective Martinez announced, producing her badge. "This is ridiculous," Vincent protested, but his voice cracked with panic. "I haven't done anything wrong. I love this family." "We have evidence that you poisoned Mary's Christmas dinner with rat poison," I said, stepping forward. "And we have your confession from last night." Vincent's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. "My confession? I don't know what you're talking about." Detective Martinez produced a small recording device. "You confessed to your unconscious wife last night, admitting that you poisoned Mary's food and that Patricia discovered your plan. We have it all on tape." As the recording played back Vincent's whispered confession, I watched his face crumble. The charming, caring stepfather facade fell away completely, revealing the cold, calculating predator underneath. "You don't understand," he said desperately, looking between me and the officers. "I've been taking care of your mother for 3 years. I've earned the right to be secure in my old age. She has more money than she could ever spend." "So you decided to murder us both for it?" I asked, my voice filled with disgust. "It wasn't supposed to hurt Patricia," he said, as if that made it better. "She was only supposed to find you dead. I would have comforted her through her grief, and eventually, when her time came naturally, I would have been taken care of." Detective Martinez stepped forward. "Vincent Morrison, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they handcuffed him, Vincent made one last desperate plea. "Mary, please, think about what this will do to your mother. The scandal, the publicity. Is that really what you want for her?" "What I want," I said coldly, "is for you to face justice for trying to murder 2 innocent people for money. My mother deserves to know that the man she trusted was planning to kill her family." As the officers led Vincent away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the threat was over, satisfaction that justice would be served, but also deep sadness for what my mother would have to endure when she learned the truth about the man she had loved and trusted. The nightmare was finally over, but I knew the healing process was just beginning. My mother would need time to recover both physically from the poisoning and emotionally from the betrayal. But she was alive. Vincent would face the consequences of his actions, and our family would rebuild stronger than before. Detective Martinez placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Mary. Your courage and persistence probably saved both your lives." I nodded, looking at my mother's peaceful face as she continued her recovery. Soon she would wake up to a world where the threat was gone and justice had prevailed. 2 days after Vincent's arrest, my mother finally began to show signs of awakening. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, and she looked around the hospital room with confusion before her gaze settled on my face. "Mary?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from days of unconsciousness. "I'm here, Mom," I said, taking her hand gently. "You're safe now." As the fog of medication cleared from her mind, I could see the memories returning. Her grip on my hand tightened, and fear flickered across her features. "Vincent," she said urgently. The food." "I know, Mom. I know everything. He's been arrested." Relief washed over her face, followed quickly by tears. "I found his notes," she said weakly. "Papers about insurance money and calculations about what would happen if you died. I couldn't believe it at first." I squeezed her hand. "You saved my life by stopping me from eating that dinner." "I wasn't sure until I saw you with that fork," she continued. "Something about the way he had insisted on serving your plate himself, the way he watched you. I just knew something was terribly wrong." The doctor entered to check on her progress, and Detective Martinez followed shortly after. My mother was strong enough to give her full statement about discovering Vincent's research notes and realizing he had poisoned my food. He had been asking strange questions about my will and the insurance policies, she told Detective Martinez. At first, I thought he was just trying to be helpful with financial planning. But then I found those calculations in his office, and I realized he was planning something horrible. Vincent's trial began 3 months later, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. The prosecution presented the rat poison container with his fingerprints, the forged insurance documents, his research history about untraceable poisons, and most damning of all, his recorded confession to my unconscious mother. During the trial, we learned the full extent of Vincent's criminal history. The prosecutor revealed that he had indeed been responsible for the deaths of his 2 previous wives, and that my mother and I would have been his 3rd and 4th victims. A pattern of financial predation stretched back over 15 years. Vincent's defense attorney tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial and that his client was being framed, but the jury saw through the lies. The recording of his confession was particularly damaging, as it clearly showed his complete lack of remorse and his detailed knowledge of the poisoning plot. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts of attempted murder in the first degree and insurance fraud, Vincent's face went completely blank. The charming mask he had worn for so many years finally slipped away entirely, revealing the hollow, calculating person underneath. "Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" the judge asked. Vincent stood slowly, his lawyer's hand on his shoulder. For a moment, he looked directly at me and my mother in the gallery. "I never meant for Patricia to get hurt," he said quietly. "I genuinely cared about her. But not enough to avoid planning her eventual murder for inheritance money," the judge replied sternly. The judge sentenced Vincent to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole, noting the particularly calculated and predatory nature of his crimes. As the bailiff led him away in shackles, Vincent never looked back at us again. Vincent received a 25-year sentence for attempted murder and elder fraud after prosecutors proved he had systematically planned to eliminate both women for a $2 million inheritance and life insurance payout. His conviction made national news as an example of domestic financial predation, and investigations revealed he had successfully murdered his 2 previous wives using similar methods, making him one of the most callous serial killers to target grieving families in Arizona's history. His professional reputation was destroyed, his assets were seized to pay restitution to his previous victims' families, and he faced additional federal charges for insurance fraud across state lines. The case became a landmark example used by law enforcement to train officers in recognizing patterns of financial abuse, targeting vulnerable widows and their families. 6 months later, my mother and I moved together into a secure apartment complex with advanced security systems, having learned to trust our instincts and protect each other above all else. As I watched my mother regain her strength and confidence, I reflected on how her final act of protection had not only saved our lives, but exposed a predator who would never again be able to harm another family. And I realized that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply ensuring that justice is served completely.